It's a loaded question right
It
here.
is.
There's a lot here. If you need a lesson in how to run an organized community, learn it from the trees, because they're always looking out for each other, and they're doing so with empathy. If we detach ourselves and can live in our little bubble, that's fine, whatever. But the more connected you are, the more you're going to see the need to make some changes in your own life.
Hello and welcome to the Plant Paradigm Podcast, where we have inspiring conversations with amazing individuals from all around the world and look for ways to create a clean, green, and sustainable future for us, the planet, and all beings. I'm your host, Tom Simak, a fellow plant eater and athlete who strives to optimize every living ecosystem, passionate about looking after this beautiful floating rock we call home and all the lovely creatures that dwell among it. Just before we get into the episode, I want to let everyone know that we have a newsletter that goes out once a month and just explores a few key elements in the topics that we explore on this show. Environmentalism, veganism, could be plastic, it could be health, all these things that dived into. It's not a news platform by any means, it's just exploring a few key crucial things and all the latest episodes that came out in that month. So if you want to subscribe, just head to plantparadigm.com and just enter your email and all goods. Now, today's guest is Nick Cutsumpas, aka Farmer Nick. Nick is what you would call a plantrepreneur, a plant lover of all kinds. Now, just based on that intro alone, it should give him enough merit to join this conversation and on this podcast, since it's called the Plant Paradigm. Now, even though he is plant-based, I'm referring to his love of indoor and outdoor inedible and edible plants. Nick helps people bring all sorts of different plants into their lifestyle and home. We're talking about integrated nature all around you and emphasizing the creation of what's known as green spaces. Think green roofs, green offices, and those vines that have taken over the sides of buildings. This is the intersection between architecture and nature, and where we live and where that all meets. So we're going to be discussing all things plants, how they can benefit our lives, integrating them into our lifestyle, and tips on how you can include a lot more nature in your day, grow them inside, outdoor, sustainable tips. And this conversation is as green and as wholesome as they come, fostering a beautiful symbiotic nature between plants and humans. So with all that upcoming, I hope you enjoy the conversation between Nick and I, and I'll see you on the other side. Nick, welcome to the Plant Paradigm Podcast. How are you going?
Thanks for having me. Life is good out here in sunny Los Angeles.
So 2 years you mentioned before we started recording that you moved out there. What was the thing that spurred the movement from New York to LA? Because the way that I understand it, they're very different places.
Very different places, many reasons that brought me out here. Number one, the plant life is incredible. Like, if you're a plant person, you can plant and garden all year long, no winter. It's a big plus. It's also chasing a girl out here. It's why, another reason why you move across the country in the middle of a pandemic. But good news is I caught her. So it's all good. And I have a soft spot in New York, but LA is pretty great.
Yeah, the plant food is definitely incredible there. I mean, what are some of your favorite places to eat there at the moment?
Oh, I mean, there's so many good ones. The vegan Mexican food here is particularly good, given how close we are to the border as well. Saying a Vegan is awesome. I think they just got rated like the best vegan taco in the country, which is pretty exciting. But aside from that, Crossroads, which is very famous, really classic spot. And I also love plant food and wine. I mean, Matthew Kenny, he's a legend in the space, had a lot of restaurants in New York as well. But you can't go wrong with Cafe Gratitude, just a casual spot. Used to live literally a block away, which was the best and worst thing for me, because I would be there almost every day. My wallet was hurting, but it was a awesome place. Still is.
Yeah, that's awesome. I've been to Cafe Gratitude a few times, and I absolutely love what they do. Beyond the food, I really appreciate the way you order food. That's do they still do the thing where you say like, I am
humble, I am grateful, I am exquisite.
Yeah, I love that. Look, we're going to be talking about plants a fair bit on this episode, and I wanted to set the stage for everyone. How do you really explain what it is you do and how much you love plants?
It's funny, depending on who I'm talking to, I'll just say, I'm just a humble gardener, right? I'm just a steward of the
Yeah.
earth. And at my core, I am. Like that is truly what I love. But the job title is I'm a plant coach. So I'm here to give you the knowledge and confidence you need to create your own green spaces. And this is all in the pursuit of environmental action. And I think that a lot of people don't realize that just through plant ownership and plant parenthood, as we'd call it, I view that very much as a stepping stone towards other sustainable, eco friendly behaviors. I mean, without plants in my life, I would have never become plant based. I would have never become an environmentalist. So, seeing the effect it had on me and seeing the effect it has on my clients is really fantastic. And to be able to run my garden design and landscaping business across the country and here in LA is just so gratifying.
Look, I was going to ask you after this what came first, chicken or the egg, like the love for planting plants or the love for eating plants. But you started kind of growing plants and you're like, well, if these can be edible, can they kind of sustain a whole diet? Is that how it went for you?
It was an interesting road. For me, it didn't start with the food, it started with growing.
Mm,
And this began, I think it was 2014. That was when I graduated from college and I was living in upstate New York. I call it upstate, but just north of the city. And my mom said, you know what? If you're going to be working and living in here rent free, you got to do something around the house. I was like, well, what do you want me to do? And she said, you love to eat, you love to be outside. Why don't you start a garden? I had never planted a single plant in my life, no house plants in the home, nothing. Went out there, threw a couple tomatoes in the ground, and I just became obsessed. Like that was it for me. And getting to taste the literal fruits of my labor was just the most mind blowing experience because it just didn't taste like what it would taste like at the grocery store.
mm,
And from there, it became how big can I make this garden? How many things can I grow? Moved into New York City. How many houseplants can I have and different things like that to keep the green in my life? And it was at that point I realized, like, okay, if I care so much about these plants and the planet, I call myself an animal lover too. Like, how
mm.
come I'm not living this in all facets of my life? And a couple documentaries got me going there. Cowspiracy was a
Yep.
big one, as I'm sure it was for a lot of folks. And from that point on, I was like, all right, I can't do this. It's just not aligned with me. And I have been plant based for about 5 years and fully vegan for now 3.
Nice. Yep. So there's a lot we can kind of dive into there. When you first started growing, because I want to talk about growing plants a bit on the show because it's something that is accessible for all of us. And on the show, we talk a lot about sustainability and the environment. And a big part of that is, I mean, recently there's a big uproar of like, hey, your garden or your lawn shouldn't be just grass. It should be wildflowers. It should be these
Mm.
things that are
Pollinator friendly. Yeah.
that's right, to help, the population of bees, insects, help the world go around, and it helps your little part in sequestering carbon. So I want to talk about these little things because having your own garden not only does it, provide you literal fruits of your labor, it actually does help the environment in a lot of like pollination, it helps composting. Like, where do you begin if you're looking to start a garden?
Whew, where to begin? I mean, most people will go to the garden center, and that is not the first step. That is the rookie move, is to just go to the garden center, start buying plants. I think the key is viewing your home and your space as an ecosystem. If you take an ecosystem first approach, you are not just going to look at how can this land benefit me with what I'm growing, but how can I benefit the land and put more into it, both from a plant perspective and also a wildlife perspective. So I will first start with the ecosystem. I will look at all the factors from light to wildlife to water sources to topography, all these different things that could impact the plant selections that I have and also the other beings that have already been there before I was. And once I kind of understand that full ecosystem and what I need to kind of do to keep it in balance, then I'm going to find ways that I can regenerate it. Is that growing my own food? Is that building wildlife habitats and pollinator hotels? You commonly see them look like birdhouses where you put little, shoots and bamboo pieces in there for them to build homes. Are you putting a water fountain and a water source? People forget that pollinators need water to survive, just like many other animals. Only then will I go to the garden center and say, okay, my ecosystem is the right way it needs to be. Now I'm going to go get some plants that will help further that mission. Many of those can help further, what is stocked in my fridge as well, which is great.
Mm.
And the pollinators and the animals, they'll thank you for it, right? If you put out a bunch of pollinating flowers around your tomatoes and your other fruiting bodies that require pollination from those insects, you will be rewarded with huge yields and an even better gardening season.
Yeah, 100%.
It's a loaded question
It
right here.
is.
There's a lot here.
Talking about topography, talking about what exactly does my environment need? Where does someone begin to source that kind of information? Because you're looking at a garden, you're thinking, well, I think the general consensus is it's soil, things grow from soil regardless of what it is. Now, obviously, people have an understanding that weather makes an impact. And then we can go
Mm.
further and say the birds in the environment, the insects in the environment, these all have an impact in how well your plants grow and etc. But where do you begin to understand what can grow, what is needed?
So I think the first step is looking beneath you. The soil is so, so important. And even at different areas of your own yard, it might be different depending on how it was amended with construction and past gardeners and tenants and those kinds of things. So for me, I want to observe that kind of soil. And if you just want to do a baseline understanding, you can Google your zip code and usually find out what kind of soil you have in your neighborhood. It gets pretty granular, which is cool. So you can see, do I have a more clay based soil, which is going to hold more nutrients, but also hold more water? Do I have a sandy loam? Being close to the beach here in LA, we have more sandy soils typically, especially the farther west you go. So understanding those factors are important because that will not just determine what plants can survive there, but also help you learn how you can potentially amend your soil to grow other things in that space. So, a quick Google search will be able to give you that information. And then I also love looking up what native plants I can plant in that area. It's a loaded question
It
right here.
is.
There's a lot here. Most exciting because it's a very dry climate.
Yeah.
It's not your lush, beautiful greenery you might expect. So I try and create a good balance between those two. And, one thing I think people forget is that native plants aren't just there to conserve water, they're there specifically for wildlife because
Hmm.
there are many forms of wildlife that depend on those native species for survival. The monarch butterfly is a very good example. It needs native milkweed in order to lay its eggs, have the caterpillars, and feed those. So, native plants is huge, soil is huge, and there are so many good resources out there that are region specific that can help you get started.
I love all that. And I want to take a macro approach after this. Look, the plant paradigm, the reason it was named this kind of podcast is because plants offer an opportunity for a lot of different things. And I almost think of them as a technology or as a
Mm,
resource. We obviously need them, but we can also help them thrive. So
it's a loaded question
it
right here.
is.
There's a lot here.
When you think of plants specifically as a technology, an opportunity, or a resource, where does your mind go with what they can offer the planet or us or wherever you choose to take that question?
Ooh, it's a loaded question
It
right here.
is.
There's a lot here. I think a couple things. Number one is the the way in which they produce their own food is truly closed loop. Like everything is tied together. And if you look at sort of the science of forests and how they exist with one another, not to get, political here by any means, but like it is all a distribution of resources underneath the soil. You have these miles and miles long networks of mycelium underneath the ground that are basically runways for nutrients between the trees. And you will oftentimes see the strongest, biggest trees diverting resources to other smaller trees in their area. And if you need a lesson in how to run an organized community, learn it from the trees because they're always looking out for each other and they're doing so with empathy. And to that point, I think that just from a human to plant interaction standpoint, plants are slow. They are very, very slow. And that is important, especially important in I think today's society, because everything is so fast. It's all about instant gratification. How quickly can I get this thing to me? And as someone who, kind of thrived on that New York City lifestyle energy, rah, 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 plants kind of pushed me backwards. Like I was like, oh, like I can't get what I want right away. And I've got to trust my process and be proactive. And I cannot tell you how much that has helped me and my mental state as well, because plants don't care, right? They're just going to go about their business. They're not going to scream or cry like a baby or a dog. They're just going to silently die in the corner if you're not there to help them. So they've taught me patience. They've taught me empathy. And I'm not a big meditation guy in the traditional sense, but you put me outside in the garden, like I could be there for hours. And it has just done wonders for my happiness and just the kind of person that I strive to be.
I love that. I love that you have a philosophical approach, because everything in life has a consequences. When we spend more time with plants, we can definitely see an opportunity in technology and what that can help us become rather. And you talk about meditating in the garden, or just being there. I'm sure a facet of that is fresh air, the air that plants breathe. They're
Mm.
obviously, they're a huge part of the cyclic oxygen carbon dioxide ecosystem that we have. Now, when you're looking to bring plants indoors, when you're thinking about it and when you're talking to other people, are you generally looking at it from the lens like we need more fresh air in here? Is that the main benefit you're trying to instill in the indoor spaces?
Not really, to be honest. And that is mostly because the amount of oxygen that they're going to produce is relatively small, unless you had hundreds and hundreds of plants in your space.
Which
It's
it
not
looks
going to
like you
have,
do.
which, I mean, right now I'm in my bedroom, which actually has only a couple plants because I travel so much. I put all my plants in the living room so my roommates can help take care of them. But in that living room, people walk in and they go, wow, like it smells great in here and it's fresh feeling and the air feels good. And that is certainly a factor for many people. But most clients are not going to add 120 plants into their living room. So for them, what I love to see is just that nurturing aspect, having something to care for, being able to kind of practice a different form of nurturing, something that I call mindful neglect, where it's like, hey, listen, this thing's been around a lot longer than you have. It doesn't need you hovering over it every 2 seconds. Let it do its thing, check in, make adjustments as necessary. But for the most part, you need to let it thrive on its own. So, getting to see clients go through that process and learn to relax themselves and de stress in the presence of plants, I think is a huge benefit for those bringing plants indoors.
Yeah, I can see how or why people call them plant parents based on that response alone. Now, is there I'm thinking now you've got this, you're talking about different plants need different levels of care, different levels of water, sunlight, different songs that you need to sing to them, all these different categories. Speaking of which, do you like talk and sing to your plants? Is that a thing?
I mean, if I sung to my plants, I'd have a lot more dead plants on my hands. So I avoid the singing. I do talk to them, that is for sure. More so just checking in, asking them how they're doing, that kind of thing. But definitely no singing.
Um, Goodness, I forgot where I was going with that. Oh, the different levels of plants. Um,
Yeah.
Also, I'm sure you could sing. You could belt out something on Spotify or something. Um, there's obviously different levels and different requirements. Now, when someone's looking to start planting, would you recommend starting at something that's very low maintenance? Like you're obviously trying to meet people where they're at, and where would someone even know where that plant falls on this make
Yeah.
believe scale?
Good preface there. Make believe is a good scale and a good reference for it, because what could be a high maintenance plant for someone in one environment could be a very low maintenance plant for someone in a different environment. So I avoid using those terms just because if you've got a beautiful south facing window that a fiddle leaf fig, which is notoriously fickle, that could thrive in that position. But if you put a plant like let's say a calathea or a begonia. Begonia probably is a better example because it's a little bit easier to take care of. But if you put that in front of a south facing window, it would absolutely fry. So being able to look at your ecosystem internally first will help determine what plants will thrive and which ones might be kind of on the more survival list there. But good plants to start off with: ZZ plants, snake plants, anything in the Dracaena family is usually pretty good. Aglaonemas are super underrated. Lots and lots of options for those who are just getting started.
And succulents, obviously.
Succulents, I mean, here in LA, they grow like weeds. You can
Yeah.
literally pick them up off the sidewalk.
Yeah. I mean, you talked at the beginning that what really fostered your love for plants was growing the food in the garden. And I think for a lot of people, especially now, I think there's this like renaissance of people wanting to grow their own food due to, the world is kind of unstable and they want that stability there. I think it's like a cling to want stability.
Yeah.
And you've got this outdoor food, indoor. Like, do you grow your own herbs and all of that? And do you have any tips for anyone wanting to grow food either outdoor or indoor?
Yes. So growing food is my first love. I think just from a pure food perspective, it's amazing, but extending beyond to some of the social issues regarding food insecurity and access to land is a huge issue here. And being able to grow your own food is empowering. It's empowering for so many reasons. Even if you're growing something as simple as an few herbs on your windowsill, it can make a huge difference. So if you are growing for the first time something edible, I would recommend starting with leafy greens and herbs for two reasons. Number one, they grow super quickly. Most will reach maturity between 30 and 45 days, but you can harvest them at any stage. If you want microgreens, just wait 10 to 14 days. If you want baby greens, wait 14 to 21. If you want the full head of lettuce, wait till 45. Those are really good options and they don't require pollination. So back in New York, I tried growing tomato plants in my one bedroom apartment, which I succeeded at. But the problem is, I didn't want to hand pollinate with a paintbrush, and I wasn't going to release bees and bugs into my indoor environment. So, leafy greens and herbs are such a great way to start. And one of my favorites in particular, I'll grow wheatgrass. You can go to the farmer's market and get your little chunk of wheatgrass for $8. You can buy 3 seed packets for $8 and grow it over and over and over again. Throw it in your green smoothie every morning, and it's amazing.
Yeah, that's incredible. Have you gotten on the sprouts trend yet?
I'm not a sprouts guy. I can't get on the sprouts. I do like just the idea of microgreens in general, but I don't have like my sprouting jar. My girlfriend will do it every now and then, but in general, I'm a more traditional guy.
I've got to admit something. I have tried multiple sprouts, and my mum's got a sprouting kit, and I've made broccoli sprouts, mung bean
Yeah.
sprouts, a bunch of them, and I just can't get around the taste. And I want to like them because I can see the health benefits, and I've listened to Doug Evans, and I'm like, oh, this all sounds incredible. Why does it taste like this?
And at the end of the day, right? You want something that's going to taste good at the same time. So I'm more of a fan of just like the general microgreens in soil. Takes, not a lot of time to grow them, but I'm just not on the sprouts train. I'm with you.
Mm, yep, yep, one of us. Look, when we're
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if we detach ourselves and can, live in our little bubble, that's fine, whatever. But the more connected you are, the more you're going to see the need to make some changes in your own life.
whether that's your own compost, there's community compost, there's apps you can use, there's lots of different
Mm.
solutions there. And something I learned is you can put like even paper and cardboard in certain levels in there, and there's
Yeah.
now they make like plant-made compostable plastics. Do you think there's like a do you have any like common mistakes people make with their plastics, or maybe some things that would really help, I guess, the growth and the fertilization of plants?
So, from a compost perspective, there's a couple different ways to do it. Right now, I'm composting currently 3 different ways here at the house. I have my Sub Pod, which I believe is an Australian
Yeah,
company.
yeah, it's from
I'm
Queensland, I believe. or
Yeah,
someone
no,
there. Yep.
I've been working with them for a while. They're amazing. And what I love about it is that my compost exists inside my veggie bed. So my tomatoes, I literally can see my tomatoes reaching through the holes of the sub pod, getting into the compost because they
That's
know where the good
insane.
stuff is. It's awesome. It's so cool. So that's the more traditional compost method. You're putting in your greens, meaning your food waste, which is very nitrogen heavy, and then you're putting in your browns, which are your yard waste, your broken or fallen leaves, broken sticks, those kinds of things. And that's one of the problems I think when people get started with traditional compost is that they don't have the right ratios of browns to greens. And typically I aim for about 60-40 browns to greens because if you just put in all your food waste, it's going to end up way too nitrogen heavy. It's going to start smelling bad. You're going to get flies and it's going to turn people off to compost. So that can be tricky if you live in an apartment complex where you don't have access to yard waste and maybe you don't have access to outdoor space at all. So a couple different methods you can do if you are indoors. Number one, back in New York, I used to freeze my food scraps and I would bring them with me to the farmer's market because they had a drop off. Many farmers markets will actually collect your compost, which is so, so cool, especially if you live in a big city. Number two, right now I'm using a service called Compostable LA, and they will come pick up extra compost that I have every Friday and they bring it to their site. They compost it themselves. They're experts in that. And then they donate that stuff out to community gardens and different groups that need it. So there's lots of services that might exist in your municipality or community that you can take advantage of. And if you want to just kind of, go high tech, you can get a Lomi, which I don't know if you've seen the Lomi at all, but I've been
I
messing
saw
around
you
with that.
post about it, but I'm not too sure what it is.
Yeah, it's a home composter. So
Wow.
basically, you're taking your food scraps, you're throwing them in the Lomi. There's a little tablet that you can put into, which has all of the kind of the microbiome that would exist outdoors. And it heats it, it dehydrates it, cuts it up, and you're ending up with more green heavy compost, but something that will not end up in a landfill. Because the common misconception is that, oh, if I throw a head of lettuce in the landfill, it'll still decompose, but depending on the access to air, water, the location of that landfill, it could take up to 25 years for that head of lettuce to decompose, which is wild to think about.
Insane. Yeah. It almost that Lomi looks like an air fryer. When I saw it when I was just scrolling your feed, I'm like, oh, he's got
Yeah, yeah.
a fancy big air fryer, like he's cooking up huge food in there. Yeah, no, I heard that if you chuck food out, it does take a lot. I didn't know it was to the extent of 25 years. I thought maybe instead of 10 days, it's 10 months or something.
Well, it depends on where it is.
Yeah, right. Um, they need more bugs there, and problem. But I suppose in that environment, it's hard, especially if it's piled on. Like you said, oxygen is we all need oxygen, bugs, microbes included. Do you worry about things like caterpillars and other insects eating away your plants?
I have just accepted my fate. It is, something that as a gardener, you're always going to be dealing with pests, especially as a gardener that does not use any pesticides or anything like that, no sprays, nothing. So for the most part, I don't worry too much about caterpillars or different pests of that nature. I've been lucky in that regard. But chipmunks, man, oh my goodness, I can't stand them. They have been a menace for me and my garden for years. And,
But they're
they're
so
so
cute.
cute.
They
They're
can't
so
be.
cute. Oh my God. Honestly, like, obviously I'm a vegan. I'm not going to do anything bad to the chipmunks, but good gracious, they are the devil. And it's funny. I moved out of New York a couple of years ago for LA, and my mom, I kept up the garden for her, and she said, Nick, even though you left and you took down the fence, we had a record number of tomatoes. Nothing ate the tomatoes. I was like, huh, what happened? What's the difference? And she goes, well, the neighbor's got a cat, and that cat has been patrolling the yard. So I think he's been, keeping the critters away, which is a big plus for me.
Yeah, it's funny how, a lot of the time we talk about cats and not letting them outdoors because of, the potential death to a lot of bird populations, but it's funny how we can also preserve a lot of vegetation like in that way.
Yeah, it's I mean, personally I don't want to know what happens if that cat is successful or not in their
Yeah.
hunting, but it has certainly helped keep the veggies protected.
Mm. So you said you don't use any pesticides or anything. Do you use fertilizers at all?
I'll use fertilizer mostly just from my compost, right? That is my fertilizer. And there are many ways to feed your plants without resorting to fertilizers. Obviously, there's lots of good fertilizers out there that are organic and made of natural materials, which is good. But for the most part, I'm a compost guy. Every time I plant something new, I'll add a little layer of compost. And cover cropping is a great method too. So putting back nitrogen, your nitrogen fixating plants like your beans, anything in like the legume family. It's really good to plant, especially in off seasons. If you want to do a crop of buckwheat or rye or clover, those are good things that you can grow that will grow like weeds. They'll probably look oftentimes like weeds. And you can just work them back into the soil when you're ready to plant something new, knowing that your soil has been relatively restored.
Mm. Yep. Yep. I love that. Do you work with like any corporate companies that want to install greens into their offices or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of corporate companies lately that have been doing a great job of incorporating greenery into more traditional old school office spaces. We've got a client in New York right now, beautiful new office in Long Island City, and they said, "Listen, we want green everywhere." And that's such a good sign, right? You
Mm.
want to be able to be a part of that movement, and some of these companies are doing this for the first time because they either have to, because there's been legislation in the past 3-4 years in New York saying you need to have green roof element or something
Very
that relates
cool.
to solar in new developments. But others are just recognizing the benefit of having a nice workspace. You know, especially with the pandemic, you're trying to bring people back to the office for the first time, and they might be really unhappy when they're transitioning back. So to create an environment that feels good, that looks great, and is just a welcoming space for everyone to be productive, I think is you're going to see that become the norm in many ways.
I was gonna ask you what it is, the reason, because for them it is an expense, and so they must see some sort of economical benefit. And I'm hoping that it's more altruistic than that. But
Yeah, you'd hope, right? Unfortunately, I think, they read up on studies around productivity and
mm,
lack of stress, focus, less sick days, even folks who had plants in their environment called out sick less than those that didn't.
mm,
So whether or not they are altruistically motivated, I think it's a great thing for the employees and to have them come to an environment where they can feel good and happy and productive in what they do, I think that's a win no matter what.
yeah, yeah, for sure. I think everyone should have that in a space, whether it's a home or a corporate office. And I really like the concept of these green roofs, green walls, all of that. Do you think that kind of thing should be compulsory globally?
Absolutely. Like there are so many opportunities to bring green not just from a aesthetic standpoint or even a environmental standpoint, but you can use those green roofs to grow food and help these communities because food insecurity is such a big factor in cities and even outside of cities. And if you look at, New York City from an aerial view, you've got all these buildings with flat tops, flat roofs that are begging for just something. And
Mm,
even if it isn't a full on green roof, because not every building, especially those that are older, are able to sustain something like that structurally. But growing hydroponically and installing systems that don't need soil, that are very much automated. I'm seeing a lot of residential apartment complexes start building basements full of hydroponics towers and farm stands that are a value add to their residents. So that is a big push, and I've worked with a couple of different hydroponic companies now, and I think that yes, it's good. It's not necessarily regenerative in the sense that it's putting back nutrients into the earth and helping solve the climate crisis from that perspective. But for helping feed people healthy, nutritious food, it's a big win.
I was reading a few studies out of the US, and there was a lot of case studies in New York in particular about the green roofs opportunity, because there was lots of data available to say that a green roof actually, um, as part of like a retrofitting program, would reduce the amount of heat in the building, and would
Yeah.
in turn reduce the amount of heating needed in the cooling needed in the building, and would in turn save money from the building owner. But also, green roofs would help the environment, the cost of the building, and all of that. But I never actually found out, and I'm curious to know if you know, and this is a very broad question because every building is going to be different, obviously. What kind of costs, if we're looking at to install like a fully green
Oof.
roof?
It can be very expensive, into the tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to install. Partially for, just bringing the material alone, right? When you're bringing, yards and yards and yards of soil up to a roof, you'll oftentimes need a crane, and to
Mm,
bring those in a city environment can be very, very challenging. Once it's there, once it's installed, the upfront cost is the biggest piece, because if you have people who can maintain it, who can plant it, if you are able to irrigate it with an automated system. In New York, it's much easier because you're not having to worry about it raining, or it rains much more than, here in LA, which is a big problem. But being able to do those things can be very cost prohibitive. But I know that many of at least the statewide governments have incentives and subsidies that you can use to help get those things growing in your own buildings. But it's not as widespread as you'd expect.
yeah, for sure. I'm picturing in a wide, many years from now, utopic society, a photo of New York where it's green roofs and like the vines are hanging down, kind of like what you see in like, is it Chernobyl, that has like the abandoned
Yeah.
city feel when nature's begun to take over the city? Like that looks really, really cool.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think it's either going to be that or it's going to be underwater. There's no in between.
Underwater in what sense? Like the city because of
Sea
the
levels rising.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Miami, New Orleans, New York, all very much in jeopardy if we can't positively impact the climate crisis as it stands right now. As optimistic as I am, I just don't know if we're going to get there in time, and maybe I won't see it in my lifetime. But it is a scary thought for sure.
It's so funny seeing you say in your lifetime, considering how young you are.
Yeah.
But yeah, look, it is very scary, and something I read recently, and I watched like there was this economic program based on a supercomputer from the 1970s that essentially its role, I think it was designed by Stanford. Its role was to predict where the universe would go, or where planet Earth would go, based on
Hmm.
certain scenarios. So economic growth, climate change, or climate change wasn't really a thing, but environmentalism was one of the categories. And so, fast forwarding to make it long story short, one of the simulations has actually been pretty spot on for the past 40, 50 years. And it kind of talks about how humanity will hit this peak and then all of a sudden we're going to trough. And so, what I'm hoping philosophically, and this isn't based on the simulation, that humanity at a point will kind of have the back against the wall, nowhere else to go, and then all of a sudden, we know the solution to climate change. Not that we already don't have the technology and know how, but to kind of talk about the hope section for a little bit, it's when we don't have any other choice. Because right now we have a choice to keep as business as usual, but eventually we won't.
Mm. Yeah, I mean that's a scary thought that it's just gonna kind of drop off like that. But I think we need to recognize that. And in the news lately, you've seen many, many climate activists doing things that are extreme to gain
Mm,
more attention and notoriety to these issues. I mean, we had a top climate scientist and activist literally light himself on fire, not a
yeah.
month ago. And, yeah, it made the news cycle for a little bit, and then people go about their day. And it's sad. It is frustrating. And I just think at this point, not that I have lost my faith completely, but you almost have to trick people into it. And that's
Mm,
why I love what I do so much, because if I can convince you to care about this tiny little plant on your desk, I'm convinced, playing the long game here, that over the course of 5, 10, 15, 20 years, you're going to learn to care more about the big plant we all live on. And if I can get you there, if I can get you with that first plant, there's no telling what might happen after that.
I love that. I love that little perspective of, you're almost learning the skill of compassion or learning the skill of responsibility or of caring for something other than yourself, which is a really weird thing to say, but that's kind of what it comes down to.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if we detach ourselves and can, live in our little bubble, that's fine, whatever. But the more connected you are, the more you're going to see the need to make some changes in your own life.
100%. Have you looked at back onto the farming side of things? Have you looked at vertical farms and have you seen a
Oh
vertical
yeah.
farm and where that kind of can
I
sit into how we work as a society?
I've been to many vertical farms. I've been to farms that are in basements of buildings where they're growing on stacks and stacks of shelves with the grow lights. I've been to farms that are growing on top of roofs, but they're hydroponic farms with greenhouses. So there's no soil in the system. All these forms of kind of urban agriculture, ag tech, it's just very, very cool. It's not yet at the scale, I think, where it's, going to be able to feed everybody, but I love the technology and I think it's got a huge potential to make a big impact on things like hunger, especially in urban cities.
Yeah, I really am looking forward to the potential it has, in particular in food deserts as well, because the concept of vertical farms and also hydroponics is that they can be grown almost regardless of the environment and it uses a lot less water and soil and all of that.
Yeah, and the thing that I struggle with sometimes in this movement, having worked with many traditional farmers and then also many hydroponic farmers, is you have them pitted against each other. Oh, that hydroponic lettuce isn't as healthy as our lettuce. It's not doing anything for the soil. It's like, listen, change needs to come from both sides. Like we're all on the same team here. People are still going to support traditional farms, but there are other folks who might not have any other way of getting fresh produce if they're living in a four-season climate like New York, where most of the food is coming 1,500 miles away from places like California, Arizona, Mexico, right? That has cost both environmentally and from a health perspective. But if you're a low-income kid from the Bronx who is learning about hydroponics in their school. This is something I've done a lot of work with Teens for Food Justice in New York, where they're literally having these students who have very little access to outdoor space growing and managing a hydroponic farm in the classroom as part of their curriculum. And I go visit there, they give me the tour, they're showing me how they harvest everything, they're weighing it. It's unbelievable. And are you going to tell that person that, hey, hydroponics is bad? And you shouldn't be doing this because it's all about the soil. Like, no, that is a positive change. We need to have change from all sides. And too often in this community, we end up shaming each other when we're on the same team and have the same goals.
Yeah, I totally agree. I never thought it from the perspective of the fun. It comes down to this perspective of not well the opposite of abundance. You think everyone's out to get you, and that's really not the case when you're talking about growing a head of lettuce in that particular example. It's like there's room for both. Like we're trying to feed 10 billion people. What do you think? Your head of lettuce, the other 5 billion isn't going to touch it. So yeah, it's definitely the case that we need both because, like you said, in the food deserts, in cities, there needs to be other solutions, especially as more people flock into the metropolitan environments and that population
Mm,
increases. When we don't like how many vertical farms can you install in New York compared to traditional farms, for example?
absolutely. And to be fair to those traditional farmers, right? You know, a lot of these vertical ag tech companies are venture backed, right? The goal is money, the goal is a return. So there is a certain amount of healthy skepticism there, which I think is justified to some
Mm,
extent. But just because we're supporting them doesn't mean we also shouldn't be supporting those traditional farms and helping them transition to more regenerative forms of growing that are moving away from the traditional factory farm and going back to the basics that many indigenous cultures and farmers of color have been doing for centuries, but have kind of been co opted by this new movement here.
yeah, I'm really excited to see the future of that and having them both work side by side. Look, let's talk to me about the replacement project you've got going on.
So the replacement project is, it's in its early stages, but the goal is to show people how there are many different things in your life that you can make replacements. And these replacements are more eco-friendly. They are things that are going to benefit, your local community. They're going to benefit your health. And I think being able to present a variety of options to folks that aren't just the most sustainable, eco-friendly thing, because oftentimes people are not ready to see that. And what I mean by that is that, I've got a couple partners that I work with that make furniture, and they do it to the highest possible standard, both from an environmental standpoint and a social justice standpoint. It's a family run business. They're doing everything right. Their employees are paid a living wage, and the furniture is expensive. And if I just showed that option, there's going to be folks who say, that's not accessible to me. And they're right. So, yes, they're doing it the right way, but we've been conditioned in our very capitalist society to expect things to be lower priced. But that doesn't mean we should exclude the people who can't afford those things. So, the replacement project is designed to show people that, hey, if you do have the means and you want to take it to that level, here are options for you. But if you don't have the means to do that, here's the next best thing that you could do. Here's a budget option. Here's a company that's not perfect, but making really great strides in these departments. So being able to show those different methods and also DIY methods for certain things is so important to give people perspective that there are options out there and you can be sustainable without having to spend $1 jillion.
I want to spend a jillion. um, you talked about underrated plants earlier in the episode. What do you think are some underrated sustainability tips along that are your favorite things that you've implemented into your life?
Ooh, underrated sustainability tips. I mean, I love the idea of just collecting rainwater. I'm fascinated by it. And when I moved to LA, I didn't realize how little it actually rained. And having been here for 2 years now, like it's even worse than in other years. But when it does rain, how can I take advantage of that? So literally went on Craigslist, found a couple of rain barrels, picked them up, put them in my house, rerouted the gutter, literally took down the gutter, rerouted it to funnel into my rain barrels. And now I'm collecting rainwater. And when it rained, oh my God, it was the coolest thing seeing these barrels fill up. And I've got 100 gallons of water now. And that water I can use for my houseplants. I can use it for my garden, whatever I need to do. And that is just, it's such a simple thing that if you're living in a home and have the ability to do that, it's not hard to do. So collecting rainwater, I think, is very underrated. If you don't have access to outdoor space and you're still looking for other sustainability tips, I carry my reusable water bottle and my reusable utensils wherever I go, because you'd be surprised how many places are going to hand you a plastic fork even for things you don't need. And for example, I ordered. It's funny. I was in Hawaii and I ordered an ice cream cone, and the cone came with a plastic spoon inside the cone. I was like, I asked for a cone, so I didn't have to get the plastic spoon. How can this possibly be? So I failed at that one. There's always going to be plastic fails, but having my bamboo silverware on me at all times is huge. And then another tip that is more general is just thrifting clothes and buying secondhand from vintage and charity shops is super important. But people are often turned off by it because they don't know how it's going to fit, this or that. But I'll go out and I'll buy a $20 pair of jeans from a name brand that maybe is not my exact size, but then I'll spend $20 at my local tailor and give a local business some money to make it the best fitting pair of jeans I have in my collection. So little things like that not just save you money and are better for the environment, but also put money back into the local community and the local economy.
I love that last one in particular because it is the community is something that I think we're all going to learn a little bit more about as we come towards the next decade. I think local economies and sustenance is going to be a huge thing. But I want to circle to the gutter situation for a second. You got these rain barrels, you got the gutter. How I want to talk about that in a really practical sense. How much did that cost you and how much time did it take?
So the rain barrels themselves, I got them on Craigslist. They were $50, so $100 there. I already had power tools, just I needed a drill, and it took about an hour. That was it.
To reroute your gutters?
Yeah, took about an hour. Because all I did was you find one of the downspouts, right? I'm not getting on the roof or doing anything like that. The downspout is just where the water is going to be filtering down once it hits the roof, and was able to kind of maneuver and swing around that downspout so that it reached the area that I put the rain barrels, and it worked out perfectly. Very inexpensive and didn't take much time.
And obviously this is an economical thing because you're going to be saving water on, well, you're not going to have to use water to water your plants. It's a environmental thing because you're not using those resources. And it was a fun little project.
Oh yeah, that was one of my favorite projects I've done. And I think once you do it and you can kind of get the satisfaction of seeing that water trickling in there, it's just awesome.
Awesome. Look, we're coming towards the end of the episode, mate. It's been an absolute pleasure. I wanted to really take advantage of having you here for one last question. I want to give you the opportunity to speak your mind for a few minutes in the form of Nick wisdom. This could be about anything. It could be something we've talked about today, or it could be something you've been thinking about recently, last year or so. But the platform is all yours to speak whatever it is you wish to.
Oh man, a lot of pressure here. You're giving me the soapbox.
Go for it.
So I guess one thing, and particularly here in the US, but I know many other places, the middle is the loneliest place to be nowadays. And what I mean by that is, you're forced to pick a side on so many issues. And if you're not 100% subscribed to the left or 100% subscribed to the right, people get on you. And I view it almost like an opposite of a bell curve, an inverted bell curve, where you got so many people on both sides, but the middle is very, very narrow. And it's unpopular to be in the middle. But I think that being realistic about your values, being realistic about what you are capable of doing, and not letting people on the extremes dictate your behavior, because doing something is better than nothing. And you shouldn't be shamed by anyone, whether they're part of your community or not, from taking action. So stand strong if you're in the middle, keep those values tight, and just remember to, go plant the plant. Make your world a little greener.
What a beautiful way to end this conversation. Make your world a little bit greener. I love that. Look, Nick, I want to finish with a thank you. Firstly, thank you for jumping on and having this conversation. It's something that I was super excited to do. I love talking about plants. Usually it's about food, but I like the garden vibes as well. Look, thank you for the work you do in regards to, I know there's obviously economical benefits, but the fact of, giving people an opportunity and a resource to bring the outside inside is something that I think we won't see a value right away. We're going to see a lot of delayed gratification, and people 5 years from now will realize, oh crap, I'm a lot happier now. Why is it? Is it because I'm surrounded by plants? Maybe. So I'm going to thank you on behalf of those people from the future who really would find a lot better. I mean, you laugh, but I'm serious. Like people, everything you do has a consequence. When you're infecting people in a positive light, in a positive manner, like that's something really incredible for a lot of people, and it's something I wish we all had a little bit more of in us. But yeah, thank you again for all that and for having this conversation. I'll speak to you next time, Nick.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, mate.
Hi there. Welcome to the end of the episode. Thank you for joining us the whole way through, whether you listened or watched. I really appreciate you. Thank you to Nick once again for coming on and sharing your wisdom about all things plants. It definitely seems like you love them, and I'm sure they love your back. So I hope everyone got some good tips from Nick on how we can start to introduce more plants into our lives. I know Shana and I would love a plant house, but while we're in this van, there's not much we can do considering traveling interstate. There are a lot of restrictions, but think of what kind of home you would want, what kind of energy you would want. And I'm really excited with the fact that you can create that using nature. There's absolutely no limitation, whether that's growing edible plants and whether that's inedible succulents or other types of plants to spruce up your space, make it seem really green. using the technology that plants have given us. So I was really stoked to have this conversation with Nick, and I hope someone's gotten something out of that. And if you're growing your own plants as an inspiration from this episode, please send Nick and I a message so we can congratulate you and just appreciate the art that is plants. If you are on YouTube, like, comment, subscribe, all the good stuff. If you're listening, feel free to rate, review. And of course, one of the most helpful things you can do is actually sending this to a friend, family member, or colleague, maybe someone who wants to start growing their own plants. This is actually a pretty decent resource to send them. So yeah, that would be incredible. But with all that being said, I hope you enjoyed the conversation. I hope you have a great week, and I will see you on the next episode. Stay happy, eat plants, peace.